lecture we saw the randomized algorithm for max cut, and we saw the randomized algorithm for max cut. We saw the first version of the randomized algorithm. We saw that its expected behavior was such that it will always output its expected output is a cut of size at least m over 2, right? And then we observed that um, the analysis or the result that we obtain proves a stronger theorem that every graph contains a cut of size at least m over 2, right? And then we were actually looking at the properties of the random variables associated with that algorithm and analyzing what they tell us about the algorithm, right? And we observed that even though we are constructing a cut uniformly at random from the set of all cuts, the analysis actually does not require that level of independence. It just requires what is known as pairwise independence. And then we were trying to see whether we can modify the algorithm such that we'll get a new algorithm whose analysis remains identical to the analysis of the old algorithm, but which can then be converted such that we actually get a cut of size at least m over 2, right? At least for the first version of the algorithm, one of the issues we felt it had was that it is only telling you that in expectation you're going to get a cut of size at least m over 2, whereas there is no guarantee as to what is the what is the size of the cut that it'll output with, say, high probability, with probability 99 over 100 or so on. You don't have any such bound, and that seems a little unsatisfactory considering considering the algorithms that we have seen so far, right? So with these observations, we are actually trying to modify that algorithm and write a second version of randomized max cut, right? And that second version of randomized max cut is what is written here, right? So what you do here now is, instead of, so the first version actually what it did was it will sample a string uniformly at random, a string of length n, binary string of length n, and the indices, the string is indexed by the vectors, the vertices, right? And so if the corresponding entry of that vector is 0, then that vertex is put in part v0. If it is 1, it is put in part v1. Right? The modified one does something slightly different. What it does is it samples a string b bar of log n length. Okay. Now for every u, you can naturally associate a binary string of length log n with it, right? Because there are n vertices, so you can represent every vertex by a log n length string. Now you look at the set S sub u, which is basically the set whose characteristic vector is the string. Right? So for instance, 0 would mean that it's 0 corresponds to the string 0, 0, 0, 1 is 0, 1, 0, 1, and so on. And the corresponding sets are written here. S0 is empty set, S1 is 3, S2 is 2, S3 is 2, 3, and so on. Right? This value is nothing but the positions at which that entries are 1. Right? And then what you do is you look at the corresponding positions in the string B and you take the XOR of those strings. Right? And depending on the XOR, if it is 0, then you put that vertex in V0. If it is 1, you put it in V1. Okay? So this is how you're going to construct the cut. Right? And once again, after you construct the cut, you output the number of edges that cross the cut. Okay? So that is the algorithm. Any questions on this algorithm? Is the algorithm clear? Any questions? I'm just recalling what we did last time. Any questions on this? Okay. So if there are no questions there, let's try to understand this algorithm a little better. Okay. So the first observation that we want to make is that, earlier what we had was that if you take any vertices, then they are assigned a part v0 or v1 uniformly at random. Right. What we'll now see is that that is not always the case in the new algorithm. For instance, if you take UVW, certain vertices UVW, it is possible that if I say U is in V0 and V is in V0, then the event that W is in V0 is somehow dependent on these two events. Okay. This is something that we briefly stated. We didn't prove this, or we didn't see why it should be. So let's try to see why this holds, right? Why is it that these events are not independent? Okay. So for instance, assume that U is the vertex, say 1, which corresponds to the string 0, 0, 1. Okay. V is the vertex, which is 2, which corresponds to the string 0, 1, 0. And W is the vertex whose string corresponds to 3, which is 0, 1, 1. Okay. All right. So now let b bar be some string. Say it is 101. Okay, this is your random choice that you have made. Okay. Now, what is the where does u go? So u goes to which vertex now? Which part? If u001 and b bar is 101, where will u get assigned to in the construction of the cut? V1. Okay. The reason is that u correspond the set S sub u is the set 3 according to our notation, and then what you do is the corresponding bit b sub u is just XOR of the third bit, which is 1 here, which is just XOR of 1, which is equal to 1, right? So u gets assigned to the vertex, to the part v1. Okay. What about v? Where does v go? The set corresponding to v is the set 2, and bu, which is basically this entry, which is 0. So v goes to the part v0. But now what happens to w? If I tell you these two quantities, okay, if I tell you that these two has happened, what can you say about w? See, w gets fixed now because now the set corresponding to w is the set 2 comma 3, right? And you're interested in the bit bw, which is XOR of b1, b2 and b3, right? But now since you know where u and v has gone, you know the value of b2 and b3, and therefore the value of oh sorry, not yeah, b this bu. Okay, maybe I should write b2 itself. Yeah, it corresponds to this. Yeah, b2 and b3, right? These two bits. So the value of bw is fixed once we know b2 and b3. And you know b2 and b3. If I tell you where u and v has gone, you know the values of b2 and b3 according to this. And then the value of w, where w goes, is fixed, right? So for these three vertices, where they go are actually dependent. They are not independent. If I tell you where u and v goes, then where where w goes is fixed, right? So therefore, these are not independent. Okay, so you don't have the same independence that you had in the earlier algorithm. Is this clear? Is it clear why this is not going to give you, independent? This is not going to be completely independent. The assignment of vertices to parts, right? So what we are actually saying here is that this algorithm, so the earlier algorithm we said was defining the uniform distribution over all cuts in the graph. This algorithm does not define such a distribution. It's going to give a skewed distribution. Some of the cuts will not even appear, right? It's going to give you a skewed distribution. It's not a uniform distribution over all the cuts in the graph, because you're not, if I tell you where a few vertices have gone, then some of the other vertices where they will go are fixed, right? In some sense, right? So it does not define the uniform distribution over all the cuts. But as I said, we don't require that, right? What you need is the following fact. What you want to know is this thing, right? You want to know that if I tell you what is the probability that u is in v0 and v is in v1, you want to say that this is equal to probability that u is in v0 into the probability that v is in v1, right? This is the pairwise independence that you want. If you had this, then that would be fine, right? You need additional. So let's start slowly. So so let's look at the following thing, right? What is the probability that u is in v0 according to this algorithm, right? According to the randomized max cut version 2, what is this probability? This is the algorithm, right? What will be this probability? That probability is half, right? As Srikanth is saying, it's half. The reason is that what is the reason? The reason is that what you're doing. So if you take U, then you're taking some subset of positions of B bar, and then you're taking an XOR, right? Now, if you're uniformly sampling B bar, then if you take those positions, the number of you're checking whether the parity of the number of ones in those positions is even or odd. What if U is 0? Uh, So U is 0 means I think the parity is 0. Okay, in that case, U always gets fixed. Okay, so that's a good point. That's a minor technical point. If U is 0, then it always gets assigned to one part. You're right. So then let's say that we are going to take it from 0, 0, 1 and so on. Right. Let's avoid that case. Right? It's just a technicality, but that's a good point. Right. If it is all 0, then what can happen is that it'll always get assigned to the vertex B0 or something. So let's say that that is assigned uniformly at random or something, right? It's just a minor technical thing that you can suitably modify this to get it right. Let's assume that let's forget about that case for now, right? It's not very important, but it's an important point.
I think it doesn't matter because if you consider V0 V and V1 as unordered, like if you interchange V0 and V1,
Okay.
I
No, no.
mean,
So no. What Pragyan is saying is the following, right? What Pragyan is saying is that suppose you start numbering the vertices as 0, 0, 0. Then according to our algorithm, that vertex will always end up in the part V0.
so what I'm saying is it doesn't matter because you can, so whether you consider V0 and V1 or V1 and V0, it's independent. So you can always choose one vertex and assign it to arbitrarily to V0.
Okay.
So for one vertex, I don't think it matters.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Good points. Both. That's good points. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Yeah. So yeah. So let's see why this. So I hope. So let's look at the case when it is having it's a non-zero bit string, right? So when U is what is the probability that U is in V0? It's just the probability that the corresponding. So what? So you have the set SU, and then you're looking at the probability that the parity of B sub I is in SU is equal to 0. This is what you're interested in, right? And if B is being sampled uniformly at random, then the probability that these set of positions will evaluate to 0 is equal to the probability that this will evaluate to 1, right? Because if you take a bit string of some length k, the number of bit strings which has even parity and the number of bit strings that have odd parity are the same. So for this probability is nothing but half, right? So therefore, this quantity is definitely equal to half. The probability that U is in V0 is half. Similarly, the probability that V is in V1 is also half. All that we need to show is the pairwise independence, right? This property here. This is what we need to show, right? If you take two different vertices, then the probability that U is in V0 intersection and the probability that V is in V1 is just the product of the probabilities. And the reason for that follows from the following thing, right? Following observation. Suppose U is not equal to V. Okay, this implies that SU is not equal to SV, right? The sets corresponding to U and V are different, okay? Which implies that there must exist an element I that is in the symmetric difference, right? Such an element must exist, right? So what you're saying is that they are not equal, so which means that SU and SV will look something like this. And there must exist some element in the symmetric difference, right? Okay. So let's assume that I is actually in U but not in V. Okay. Let's take this case, right? So now what does it mean? So what does that mean? So now what is the probability that U is in V0 given that V is in V1? Okay, this is what we want to know. Right? What is this probability? If I tell you that V is in V1, what is the probability that U is in U0? So what you can see is that this must be equal to half, right? The reason being that if I tell you the bit, so what do you know? So you know that the parity of BI where I is in SV, sorry, let me change the index, I'll write it J. Okay. This is equal to 1. This is given to you, right? This is what it means to say that V is in v1. Okay. Even if I give me that, then this index I, okay, this index I is free to be assigned 0 or 1 with equal probability. Right? You have just said that so let's just draw this a little bit, right? So you have the string b1, b2, b3, so on, say till bi, and say bk, and say v corresponds to these indices. Okay, so this is v, this is the indices corresponding to v, and indices corresponding to v, u might be something like this, right? Somewhere like this. Anyway, this is sitting in here. So this is the ones that corresponds to you, right? So irrespective of what value you place to these, this has equal probability to be 0 or 1, which means that no matter what value you give me, I can either keep the parity same or flip it with probability half, right? Which means that the probability that u is in v0 is somehow independent of whether v is in v1 or not, because there is still one index which is free, which you can fit with which you can fix with probability half to either 0 or 1, right? So therefore these two events, that u is in v0 and v is in v1, they are independent events, right? So the same analysis that we saw for the original randomized max cut also works here. If you had given me, instead of writing that algorithm, if you had written this algorithm, right, you could have done the same analysis, and you would have still come to the conclusion that the expected value of the cut is at least m over 2, is equal to m over 2, right? So it's like typically you would have seen algorithms where you write an algorithm and you see multiple analysis, some tighter, some weaker, and so on. What you have here is one analysis which you look and observe that even if you modify the algorithm in a significant way, the analysis still remains the same, right? So we have modified the algorithm, yet the analysis remains the same, and we get the same bound regarding the expectation of the random variable x. Right? So is this clear? Is this argument clear? Any questions regarding this? Right. So what we have just shown is that maybe I can just state it as a theorem. The expected value of the cut returned by the randomized max cut version 2 is m over 2. It's the same bound as before. That's what we have proved. Right? The same analysis goes through. The extra observation is that the events of u being in v0 and v being in v1 are independent. Right? With that observation, the same analysis goes through. So that's what we have just proved. Any questions on this? Okay. So if that is clear, so now the algorithm, so once this is clear, so you know that this algorithm where you're choosing random, this log n length random string, the expected outcome is m over 2. What this means is that there exists some random string b bar in 0, 1 to the log n, such that the cut s complement corresponding to b bar has value at least m over 2. Right? This must happen. Right? These are all the possible random choices. Now you're saying that if you take the average over all these random choices, the cut value, the average is at least m, is equal to m over 2, which means that for some fixed string, the cut value must be at least m over 2. Right? So if you know that, what you do is the following: your new algorithm, which is the deterministic max cut, right? What do you do? For every b bar in 0, 1 to the log n, right? Compute the corresponding cut and output the largest among them. Right? So you've removed the randomization by saying that you brute force search over all possible random strings. You know that the average over all the random strings is equal to m over 2, which means that there must be a fixed string for which this cut has size at least m over 2. So you search over everything, right? You just brute force search over all random strings. And the number of such strings, right? The number of such strings, this number is just order n. Right? There are only order n, there are only n such numbers, right? 2 to the log n. So there are n numbers. Let's say order n. They're just order n numbers, and you just brute force search over everything, and you've output the maximum. So now you actually have a deterministic algorithm that will always output a cut of size at least m over 2. Right? It's not the original algorithm, but it's this new algorithm where you look at all binary strings of length log n and use those binary strings to construct the cut. And one of those cuts must have large size. Right? Is this clear? Is the deterministic algorithm clear? So now we actually have, earlier we said the expectation is m over 2, but now we are saying that I can also give you a cut of that cardinality. Right? Any questions on this? Right. So one thing to note is that if you can reduce the number of random bits that the algorithm uses, then you can actually brute force search over all the random strings to find out, which one will actually is correct. Right. It is one way to actually convert randomized algorithms to deterministic algorithms. Typically, when you have a randomized polynomial time algorithm, then it can use polynomially many random bits. In which case, if you try to brute force, you get an exponential time algorithm, deterministic algorithm. But if you analyze that algorithm carefully and realize that it actually does not require so many random bits, but only logarithmically many random bits, which is the case here, then you can just brute force over all the random bits and find out the answer that you want. You can convert that to deterministic algorithm as well. Right? So this is actually in terms of approximation algorithms, what it is that max cut has a half approximation algorithm. Right, this is what you've just shown. Which means that the max cut problem is NP hard, which means that you cannot actually find the exact size of the max cut. But whatever be that size, you will always output a cut whose cardinality is at least half of that maximum value. Right? Whatever be that value, I don't know what that value is, but I can come up, my algorithm will always output a value that is guaranteed to be at least half of the actual maximum. Deterministic algorithm. That's what we have just shown. Okay. Any questions so far? Any questions on this? Is everything clear? Is there anything that is not clear also in the analysis and the arguments that we have seen? All right. So that is so these two problems which are related to, which seem related, right? Min cut and max cut, which are very varying complexity and so on. Now let's just understand another problem, which is again related, something that you've seen before, whose analysis also you might have seen. But I want to emphasize on it again because we need to understand this idea of how to understand, how to analyze random variables by decomposing them into smaller random variables, just to refresh that idea once more, right? So let's look at this problem.
I
Yeah,
actually have a question.
yeah.
Um, this construction of this randomized algorithm sampling from 0 to 1 power log,
Huh.
is that motivated by the fact that we needed only pairwise independence? Like, for
Yes.
example, suppose you had some other algorithm that required only pairwise independence somewhere.
Yeah.
We could use the same technique to
Yeah.
um,
You could.
basically get the same thing.
Yeah. If you assume pure of complete independence, but the analysis only requires pairwise independence, right? Then you could use something similar.
Okay, okay.
So here you're getting pairwise independent random bits. Similarly, you can do something. There are a lot of constructions for such pairwise independent bits and functions. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, we will see some more actually. We'll see again this as we go along. Right? This comes up especially when we study hashing, right? Where we don't have purely random hash functions. What we have are hash functions that look random, which have some of these properties. Like instead of independence, you'll have pairwise independence and so on. And you want to analyze how well they perform as hash functions. Right? So it will come up again in this course. Yeah.
Another thing I want to ask, like this algorithm does not really use anything related to the graph, right? It's just a
Exactly.
random sampling, and then you can get something out of this.
Yeah. So
Uh,
that's one of the things about this randomized algorithms, right? It can be very powerful, right? So, for instance, you've actually proved that every graph has a cut of size at least m over 2, right? As a structural result. And that power also comes from the fact. So the probabilistic method, which I just briefly mentioned, right? So that has this, you have very, very really amazing results that you can prove, right? Purely existence results, right? Not many of these results can actually be made constructive, right? In this case, you can. But in general, probabilistic method can give you results which are very, very nice, but which are non-constructive. Right? It will prove existence of objects without actually finding out those objects for you, right? So it's mostly the power of the probabilistic method that is coming in. Yeah. So it is a little strange, but and it's very elegant. In fact, there is a book by Alon and Spencer called The Probabilistic Method. You can, if you are interested, you can read it. It contains a lot. It basically is a monograph on probabilistic method and its applications. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? All right. So let's look at a more an example that you have already maybe seen before, but in any case, let's just go over it. So this is this example of what is known. This is the algorithm that you probably know, which is known as quicksort, right? Something that you have seen many times in your algorithms course in various settings, right? And so what is a quicksort algorithm? It's this algorithm where you're given an array, right? You're given an array. Let's assume that entries are all distinct. What you do is, it's a sorting algorithm. It's always going to output a sorted array. What you do is you choose what is known as a pivot. Right? This is, you choose a pivot element, right? And then what you do is you try to place the pivot element in the correct position, right? So this is what is known as the partition algorithm. Right? An order n time algorithm. What it does is it places the pivot element in the correct position of the sorted array. Right? Say it is this. And then what you do is you run this algorithm, right? You run the algorithm on these two subarrays, right? So then you basically recursively solve quicksort on the subarrays. Right? It doesn't matter how we implement the partition algorithm and so on, but this is the idea of quicksort. Right? So you have you find the pivot element, and then you run this partition algorithm. Think of it as some black box which can always place that element correctly in the correct position according to the sorted array. Once that is placed in the correct position, you don't need to worry about that element anymore. So you look at the two subarrays and you sort them again by the quicksort recursively. And typical analysis, right, of this algorithm would ideally what can happen is that you choose the pivot element, which is the midpoint, which is the center of the midpoint of the sorted array. In which case you would have split the array into two subarrays of equal size, and the running time is usually given by the, in that case is given by the recurrence, that Tn is 2 times Tn over 2 plus order n. Right. So this is the time for partition algorithm. And this is the time for the recursive call. Right. And for this recurrence, if you solve, what you can say is that the running time is something like theta n log n. Right. So that is a quicksort algorithm which has a running time of theta n log n. Just that we don't know whether the pivot is always the midpoint. Right. It's not always the case that the pivot can be the midpoint. For instance, if you have a deterministic algorithm where, say, you always choose the pivot as the last element of the array, in which case, if you take an array of this form, right? So suppose your array A is this array which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then what can happen is that you will first choose 5 as the pivot, in which case you have not, even though you have partitioned it, you still have the entire array left with you, right? You have this entire array left, which you have to sort again. Then say you choose 4 as the pivot, in which case the remaining things are left, and so on, right? And each time choosing the pivot requires order n steps, and therefore this running time would be, in this worst case, for a deterministic choice of pivot, the running time is order n squared, right? Because each time you have to run the pivot, and each time your array size is reduced by only 1 rather than halving, right? So this can give you a running time of order n squared, right? That is a deterministic algorithm, right? This is the worst case analysis of the deterministic algorithm. So one way in which some people, this is analyzed in some lectures and books, is that you assume that the array is uniformly at random, right? That it's not of this worst case behavior. Say the array is uniformly random, in the sense that the array has been, it's a uniformly random permutation of the array of those numbers, right? That it is not a worst case input. In which case you can say that maybe assuming that the input is uniformly random, then its behavior is like, the theta n log n. This is something that is analyzed, right? But the problem is that you can usually not assume anything. It's not a good thing to assume about properties of the input, right? Because you have no idea how inputs are distributed. You don't know where this input is coming from, and so you can assume nothing about the input, right? That's not a good analysis to do. And so the way this is avoided is at the heart of the analysis and the design of these randomized algorithms, right? You can assume nothing about the input. You cannot assume that it is uniformly random or anything like that. So let's make the algorithm randomized, right? You can get a possibly worst case input, but then let's try to avoid it by making random choices ourselves, so that even if there is an adversary who's trying to beat you, because of the random choices that you make, the adversary is not going to succeed with high probability. Right? So that is the heart of many of these design things, design of randomized algorithms. You don't know anything about the input, so assume the worst case input, but let's try to beat that worst case behavior by randomizing the algorithm rather than assuming anything about the input. Okay? And that's what we are going to see. Okay? We will change this algorithm slightly to instead of deterministically choosing the pivot, we look at what is known as randomized quicksort. okay, and then try to analyze the properties of it. Okay. So what is randomized quicksort? So what you do is, instead of deterministically choosing the pivot, okay, what do? You choose a pivot uniformly at random from the set 1 to n of the from those n positions, right? There are n positions. You choose a position uniformly at random and as take that to be the pivot. Okay. So notice that this algorithm will always, even though it is randomized, it will always output a sorted array, right? No matter what random choices you make, it will always output the sorted array, because once you choose the pivot, everything else is fixed, right? Once you choose the pivot, the partition will always put that element in the correct position of the sorted array. And then you are recursively calling the same algorithm on the two subarrays. Right? So even though you are randomizing the algorithm by choosing the pivot at random, the algorithm will always end up giving you a sorted array. The only thing that varies is the running time. Okay? So the random variable of interest here you're interested in is the running time. And a little more concretely, if you want to say, it is the number of comparisons that the algorithm makes. This captures the running time, because the running time, the partitioning that you're doing will depend on the number of comparisons, right? You're going to compare the pivot with the remaining elements to move it around. So what you're actually interested in is the number of comparisons that this algorithm makes, right? Is this clear? So I hope you've seen quicksort before, and I hope you understand what this randomized quicksort is. If you have already seen it, you might have already seen randomized quicksort also, but I hope the setting is clear. Any questions here? Okay. Okay, good. So what you actually want now is to understand this random variable. Let's call this random variable x, right? The running wait time. And we want to understand the behavior of x, right? So for instance, you know that if your choice of pivot is always nice, you have a running time of order n log n. And if the choice of pivot is bad, you have a running time of order n squared. But so what is the sort of average that you can get, right? So what is E of x, the expectation of this random variable? This is what we are interested in, the first step. Ideally, what do we want? We want, this is what we want. It would be nice that expectation of x is something like theta log n, because this is the best case behavior. Maybe the average case behavior is also like this. This is good. The other thing that we are actually really interested in, which we will see soon, but maybe not right now, is what is the probability that this random variable is actually, the value something like, say, 10 n log n, say. Right? Even if you tell me that the expectation is n log n, what is the probability that this random variable, that is the running time, really is something like 10 log n? It is actually equal to theta n log n. This is more interesting. This is also a very interesting thing a very important thing to answer. Right? Maybe the expectation is n log n, but then it varies quite badly, right? In which case it's not such a good algorithm. Right? So the thing is that it is this is true, right? The probability that x is 10 n log n is actually true, right? The reason it's called quicksort is that it is really a quick sorting algorithm. Right? It's one of the fastest sorting algorithms. Right? So this part of this question we'll answer soon within 2-3 lectures, right? But what we'll do first is try to, understand the expectation of this random variable. Okay. Once again, we don't it's hard to actually analyze X directly, right? X is the number of comparisons that the algorithm makes. It's hard to argue X directly. What we'll instead do is we will actually try to write X as sum of simpler random variables that are easier to analyze, right? As usual, like the way we do. The other thing to note is that sometimes, so in many of the algorithms that you will see that will take a random variable and express it as a sum of simpler random variables. It is not always the case that you can do this, right? In some cases, the random variables might be complicated functions of simpler random variables, right? I don't know whether we will see any significant examples during the course. I'm not sure yet, but it is also possible that it's not just a sum. It can be complicated functions, right? In which case the analysis can become a little more difficult, right? But in most cases, in many cases, let's try to make it as simple as possible. So here, let's try to write X as sum of some simpler random variables. Okay? And what is the simplest thing that you can do? Okay, so let's see. So say you're given an array A, call it A1, A2, and so on till AN. Okay, and look at the sorted array A. Okay, which is the take A and sort it, then it will look like this. Let's say it looks like B1, B2, and so on till Bn. Okay, this is the sorted array. So it's A1 to AN, the set A1 to AN is equal to the set B1 to the B1 to Bn. Right? It's just that B1 to Bn is the sorted version of A1 to AN. Okay. Now we will define this random variable. Since we are interested in the number of comparisons, we'll define what we'll do is we'll look at every pair of elements and we'll say whether they are compared or not. Okay. So for every pair of elements, if we check whether they are compared or not and we sum up over all pairs, then that will cover the total number of comparisons that the algorithm makes. Okay. So we'll define an indicator random variable. Okay. Call it Xij. Okay. This is 1 if Bi is compared with Bj and it is 0 otherwise. Okay. Let's assume that say I is less than j. Correct. So this is a random variable Xij, which is 1 if Bi is compared with Bj and it is 0 otherwise. Okay. Compared in the run of during the execution of right, compared during the execution of randomized quicksort. Now you can write X as summation Xij. Say I is less than j, right? We don't need to count it twice. This is what we are actually interested in. And therefore, we can write by linearity of expectation that expectation of X is summation I less than j expectation of Xij, right? So all that we need to actually compute is this quantity, right? Expectation of Xij, right? Okay. So let's try to see what is expectation of Xij. Right? So what does Xij mean? So Xij is 1 if Bi is compared with Bj, right? So when does it happen that Bi is compared with Bj in the quicksort algorithm? Right, that's what we want to see. Right? At what point? When does it get compared? Right. So if you notice the algorithm, if you see how the randomized quicksort works, you choose a pivot, and once you put the pivot in the correct position, every element that is less than the pivot and every element that is greater than the pivot are in either side of that pivot element. Right. So if you take two elements say I1 and I2, and pivot turns out to be an element that is between I1 and I2, which means that I1 is less than J, which is less than I2, where J is the pivot, then I1 and I2 is never compared by the quicksort algorithm, right? So the elements Bi and Bj are compared only if, when you choose a pivot between these two elements, the pivot, if you take, so when is Bi compared with Bj? So Bi is compared with Bj if and only if the first time a pivot is chosen from the set Bi, Bi plus 1, and so on till Bj. The first time a pivot is chosen from this set, the pivot is either Bi or Bj. Correct? The reason is that if you say choose Bi plus 1, okay, say the first time you choose a pivot from the set is say Bi plus 1, then what happens is that you will compare Bi plus 1 with Bi, and you know the Bi is less than Bi plus 1, so that lies to the left of Bi plus 1. Similarly, Bj, and you compare with Bi plus 1, Bj is greater than Bi plus 1, so it lies to the right of the right of Bi plus 1. And then recursively, you are going to sort the array till Bi plus 1 and from Bi plus 1 to Bn, right? So which would mean that you will never compare Bi and Bj again. If at the first instant that you sample an element from this collection Bi to Bj, if it is any element other than Bi or Bj, then you will never compare Bi and Bj. Right? So the probability that the expected value of Xij is same as the probability that Xij is equal to 1. This is the probability that the first time a pivot is chosen from Bi, Bi plus 1 to Bn, it is either Bi or Bj. Right? If you choose either Bi or Bj, then anyway the partition algorithm will make sure that you will compare Bi and Bj. Yeah. Yeah. So what is this probability? Right? So this probability is nothing but 2 divided by j minus I plus 1. Right? You have to choose one of those two among the set. This is the probability that this happens, right? It's only if you choose one of those two elements that you will end up comparing them. Right? So the expected value of Xij is nothing but 2 divided by j minus I plus 1. Right? Any questions so far? Okay. So then, what is the expected value of X? It is nothing but summation I equal to 1 to n, summation j is equal to I plus 1 to n, right? 2 divided by j minus I plus 1. Right? This is, this is what it means to say that summation I less than j, right? This is what it means. Now you can do some rearrangement and so on, right? This is some standard rearrangement that you will see. Summation I equal to 1 to n minus 1. Okay, this should be n minus 1 also. Summation k is equal to 2 to n minus I plus 1, 2 by k, right? It's just rearranging the inputs, right? So when j is I plus 1, this will be 2. And if j is n, then this is n minus I plus 1, right? So that's what has been rewritten this way, right? So if you simplify this, right, it's just, you can just do the simplification. Simplify this. This is there in the book. You might have seen it before. If you have not seen it, just do it once. Right? If you simplify this, what you will get is that the sum can be written as 2 times n plus 1 times summation k is equal to 1 to n 1 over n minus 4n. Okay. And this sum here is what is known as the harmonic sum, right? And it's known that harmonic sum, this is nothing but uh, ln n, right? Logarithm to the base e plus theta of 1, right? So on simplification, what you just see is that this quantity expectation of x
Sir,
is
excuse
equal.
me, sir.
Yeah,
Should it be 1 over n or 1 over k?
it should be 1 over k. Sorry, it should be 1 over k. Yeah, thanks, Keshav. Yeah, it should be 1 over k. Yeah, right. So this is this expectation is nothing but theta. What is it? I think it is 2n ln n plus theta n. Okay. This is what you will get. Okay. So the expected running time of quicksort, or the expected number of comparisons that the quicksort algorithm makes, randomized quicksort algorithm makes, is something like n ln n, right? Plus theta n. Right? Is this clear? Any questions on this? Okay. All right. So as I said, what is interesting to know is what happens. So this basically tells you that the expected value is something like 2n ln n, right? Which means that the expected value is theta n log n, right? Whereas we don't know what or how it varies, right? It is possible that it's theta n log n, but then the probability that it's going to take the value n log n might be very low, right? It's possible that it varies quite wildly, right? Even though the expectation is so much. So what we are actually interested in is this probability that this running time is actually n log n, right? Irrespective of um, the running time is actually n log n, even if you know that the expectation is this. How well concentrated around the expectation is this running time? That seems like a more interesting question and an important question to answer, right? Than just saying that its expectation is n log n. And that is what we will see soon, right? We'll try to develop a way to answer questions like that. If you know that the expected behavior of an algorithm is such and such, what is the probability that the algorithm will be behaving like the expectation, right? So that is something that we will try to see. So maybe that we will see uh, in the next week, right? So there are a couple of things that I want to start. If I start, it might just take a little long. So I think we'll have a short lecture today. We'll try to wrap up right now. And before leaving, I have a few some announcements to make also, right? Before you leave, I have a few announcements to make. Right. So it's regarding so any questions regarding the material that is covered today? Any questions, doubts? Okay. All right. So just a few announcements. One is that I have sent this email about the papers, right? The course project, which is about reading a paper, reading a bunch of papers related to a topic and presenting and so on. So I want you to take your time and form groups. So instead of, as I said, don't try to read these papers alone, right? It's not that you cannot do it, but just that there are two papers I have given. Some of them are long, and some of them are not very easy to read and understand. So if you have a group, then it's better that you'll be able to discuss with people and so on. So try to form groups, talk to people in the among yourselves, and form groups of 2 or 3, and then decide on the topic that you want to read, right? So for every topic, I've given a couple of papers except for one topic, right? And so go through it, form groups, and then decide which one you will read, right? It's okay to read it alone, but I'll strongly not recommend it. Okay. And what do I mean? So what is the expectation of this project? So by August 25th, we will try to finalize, you will finalize what you want to read, right? After that, we will have a meeting, say with a month after that, or yeah, close to a month after that, where you can briefly tell me what is the, what is the problem that is being solved in that paper, what are its main results, right? So that you understand what the paper is about. Okay, just a brief description of the paper, the main results in the paper, and so on. Okay, and then we will proceed from there. So I will also tell you, some of these papers are very long and slightly complicated. So depending on your choice and depending on the papers that you have chosen, I might I might say that you don't actually have to read the entire paper. Okay, so you probably don't have to read the entire paper, but maybe parts of it, depending on which papers you have chosen. And so that I will tell you after that first round of evaluations, right? So that evaluation is not like a presentation or anything. We'll just have a small meeting where you can just tell me what you have been reading, right? So by that time, you can also, maybe if you have formed a group, by that time you can divide the work of who will be reading what parts, right? So that you can divide it, read them separately, discuss amongst yourselves, and so on, right? So that we will have. So August 25th is when you have to tell me what paper or what topic you will cover, and then within a month after that, maybe September, we will decide. You can briefly tell me what you have read, what you have understood about the paper, right? You don't need to go into any technical details, any proofs or anything. Just what is the paper trying to solve, right? What is the basic problem the paper is trying to solve? What do they achieve? And what is maybe the scope? What do they leave as open? What can be extended, and so on, right? No technical details, but just this idea. To get this, you probably just need to read the introduction, the related results, and then you can briefly go over the technical content by looking at the statement of the lemmas and the theorems without reading the proofs. Okay, just understand what the theorem statement says, right? Forget about how it is proved and so on, right? Forget about very technical lemmas and so on, but what is the main theorem, right? Just state the result, just understand the result, right? That is that you can do. And if you want, so you can also actually, so the two papers that I've given there are not exactly representative of anything, right? They're not representative papers of that area. They're just two papers that I feel are maybe not too difficult to read. They're not very new, right? These papers are not very new, so you don't need a lot of background to read. They are sort of like simple enough to understand without a lot of background related to that area, right? Hopefully, or at least you'll be able to read it based on what you already know, right? Those are the sort of papers that I've given. So one thing you can do, if you after this, is if you want to know how it can be extended or what has been done after that, you can go to, say, Google Scholar or something and type this paper's name, and you will see the papers that have cited this paper, right? So you will know how this has been extended and where these ideas have led to, right? That is one thing that you can try. Okay, so that is something that you can look. So by September 25th, so August 25th, you send me the list of the paper, the topic that you're reading. By September 25th, you tell me what the paper is about, right? And if you have a group, of 2 or 3, what different persons are trying to read. Okay, so that is September 25th. And then you can start slowly reading the paper carefully. And just remember that reading a paper is not like reading a textbook, right? So you don't have to read to understand every single thing that is written, right? Some of the things can be skipped if it is too technical and so on. That if you have any doubts regarding some of the topics which you're not understanding and so on, we can talk. But you have to get a general idea of what is the result and how the proof, or how it is proved in that paper, right? So maybe there are very technical statements which you can slowly skip. So when you're reading, you don't try to read from the front to the back, like a textbook where you understand every line and so on. Typically, when you read a paper, you start with the end, you look at the main result and you see what are the different sub results that lead to this result, read those sub results, try to understand them, and so on, right? So reading a paper requires a different set of skills than reading a textbook. Okay, so I will send you some documents about how to go about reading a paper and so on if you want, or we can talk about it, right? But the goal is to actually understand what is the work and where it's going to lead to, what are the open questions and so on, rather than understanding every single line, right? I mean, that is not possible. I don't expect you to do that also, right? Because that might be too difficult. But it's important to have a very clear idea of what is proved, right? Maybe not all technical details. Some of them might depend on results that are proved somewhere else and so on. Yeah. Where has... Oh, okay. So you have not seen the paper. So I think a few of you have chosen the topics, but you have not seen the paper. So the papers are there in the home page. So let me just take that for you. So you can see my screen, right? So there is this course reading link which contains these papers. Yeah. So there are these topics. So the topics that I've listed corresponding to those topics, there are these couple of papers. Some of them have just one paper. So you can go over these papers and briefly go over them to decide which one you want to read. Right. So there is these things about randomized rounding, pessimistic estimators, hashing, random walks, algebraic techniques, dynamic reductions, matchings, color codings, dynamic algorithms, and online algorithms. Right. Okay. Yeah. So this is the list of topics. So even if you have a different topic that you want to read, you can always let me know. We can try to find out something to read on that. And even in this topic, if you have some other paper that you want to read, that is also fine. You can suggest to me. Right? I've just chosen a couple of papers which I feel might be easier to read, and it's not too difficult, right? And not too recent, right? So if you have some other topics or papers in mind, you can always tell me that also. So you can check here. So this contains all the details, right? So please talk to your friends and form groups before deciding on what you want to read. Okay, that is important. Okay. Any questions on this, the course project part? Okay. So that's the course project part. So that is one thing. The second thing is I will send out an assignment, a problem set, which contains around 4 questions with a couple of subparts and so on, which you can solve. So it's based on whatever we have seen so far. The deadline for the submission will be 23rd. So today is 12th. 23rd is the Monday after the next Monday, right? And so you have 2 weekends and it's like 11 days. You have to write up the solutions. So I'll give the tech file as well. You can just type up the solutions there and upload the PDF alone on the Moodle. Right? I will set up the assignment submission page there. You can submit the assignments there on Moodle. So I want everyone should actually be registered on the Moodle. I think there are a few people who are still not registered on Moodle, right? So please make sure that you're registered on Moodle, right? So if you're registered on only, then you can submit these assignments. So if you have your LDAP accounts, you can actually register on Moodle. So please make sure that you're registered on Moodle. I'll send out the assignment by tonight or early morning tomorrow. Okay? And as I said, the assignments are such that I'll allow you to collaborate, but every question, only 2 people can collaborate. Right? So if there is question number 1, if A and B collaborate, then question B cannot talk to C about it, right? About the question 1. And even when you're collaborating, make sure that it's just discussion, right? Do not write down the solutions. And just to be on the safer side, here is one guideline that you can follow. Whenever you discuss, you should not write anything during the discussion, right? You can phone and talk, you can have a Google Meet or anything like that, but you should not write down anything during the discussion. It should just be a discussion where you talk and exchange ideas, but you don't write anything down. The solution you will have to write on your own, right? So that should be tied up independently. You can discuss each question, maybe 2 of you can discuss, but you should not write down anything during the discussions. No emails also, right? No emails, no notes or anything. And do not share the solution, and do not just tell out the solution also, right? Don't say that, write down the solution, don't read the solution to your friend also. That is also not allowed. Okay? So make sure that you follow these guidelines. Otherwise, you can discuss. Okay? But the solutions that you write must be your own. Okay. So yeah, so these are the couple of things that I wanted to say. Yeah. So anything else? Any other details? So I think there was some question on the anonymous forum about attendance, about whether I keep attendance. So since it's an online lectures and I don't, and some of you might not have very good internet, which I don't know, right? And you might get disconnected and so on. I will not keep attendance, 85% attendance. I'm not tracking attendance, but I do track who all attend the lectures, right? So that I check just so that I make sure, just to make sure that you are actually attending the lecture, following the content and so on. That I follow, but I don't use that as an attendance, and you will not get penalized for that or something. So that 85% rule I don't apply for online lectures. Right? Yeah. So this was some comment that was written in that anonymous form that I had shared. Yeah. Any other questions related to the course, related to the contents? Yeah. Any suggestions or comments? Okay. So in that case, I think we will wrap up for today. We will continue with whatever we are discussing in the next week, right, on Monday. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.